You're such a selfish bitch, Rachel. I hope your baby never wears anything I give him again. That was the last text Melissa ever sent me, and honestly, I didn't think I deserved it, at least not at first. After all, it was just a baby onesie, a stupid piece of fabric with the wrong logo on it. I didn't even mean to be rude. I thought it was a joke. My husband and I have always taken our college rivalry seriously. Fall Saturdays are sacred. Tailgates, chants, colors. We built a piece of our identity around that shared obsession. So when someone brought that onesie to our baby shower, what was I supposed to do? Pretend to love it? Still, I didn't expect a joke to destroy a friendship. Not just any friendship. One that had lasted since freshman year. I guess motherhood teaches you a lot about people. About loyalty, pride, and the battles worth picking. I never thought a baby outfit could blow up my life, but here I am, 1 week away from giving birth and suddenly very alone. Nate and I met on the first day of college orientation. It was one of those sticky, sun-drenched August afternoons where everyone was sweating through their shirts and pretending not to care. I remember spotting him across the lawn, tall, grinning, wearing a maroon cap with our college's emblem front and center. He looked like the kind of guy who already knew where everything was, who belonged. Turns out, he was just as lost as I was. We ended up helping each other find the student union, and it started as friendship, but by the time midterms rolled around, we were inseparable. We'd study late into the night in the library, share fries and milkshakes at the campus diner, and every Saturday during football season we dressed head to toe in school colors, screaming until we were hoarse. Nate lived for those games, for the camaraderie, the spirit, the strategy. I wasn't really into sports before him, but his passion was infectious. I painted my face, learned the fight songs, and memorized the players. It became our ritual, our bond. By our junior year, we were practically living together. His off-campus apartment became my second home. We shared everything. Books, dreams, stupid inside jokes. We made plans. Real ones. Marriage. Kids. A house with a big backyard. I saw a future with him so clearly that it felt like we were already building it. Then came graduation. I got accepted into a prestigious graduate program in Boston. It was my dream, a launching pad for the career I'd always wanted in public health policy. Nate, meanwhile, had been offered a solid marketing job in his Indiana hometown. For weeks, we danced around the obvious. We both wanted different futures, but we didn't want them without each other. And I cared about him. I still did. Ma had seen this in my... One night, sitting cross-legged among half-packed boxes, Nate took my hands and said, "I want a life with you, more than I want any job or city." I remember how his voice cracked when he said it, and how my heart ached knowing what it would mean. The next morning, I declined Boston. I told myself love was worth more than ambition. We moved to his hometown, quieter, slower, but filled with familiarity. We got married that fall, under a canopy of orange leaves in the field behind his parents' barn. Our college fight song played as we walked down the aisle, and everyone cheered when we kissed, like it was a victory. At first, everything felt right. I took on freelance work, got to know the neighbors, and tried to blend into the rhythm of small-town life. But sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake, wondering about the life I'd left behind. Still, every time Nate smiled at me, every time we curled up to watch our team play on Saturdays, I told myself I had everything I needed. I told myself I felt everything I needed. 2 years later, we started trying for a baby. It didn't come easily. There were months of disappointment, quiet grief, and a growing weight in our home that we didn't know how to name. Then, one icy January morning, the test turned positive. I ran into the bedroom holding the stick, sobbing. Nate grabbed me and spun me around, both of us laughing through tears. "We're gonna be parents, Ray," he whispered. It felt like our love had earned this, that somehow every sacrifice, every hard choice had brought us to this moment. I believed that love, our love, was the foundation strong enough to carry anything. Pregnancy brought us even closer, at least at first. Nate talked to the baby every night, played our college's fight song against my belly like it was a lullaby. We painted the nursery in maroon and gold, hung framed photos from our college days. It felt like we were passing on a legacy. Our shared story, now becoming part of someone new. But as the months went on, I began to feel a shift. Nate became more insistent on certain things. What colors we'd use, what school our child would root for, what kind of values he'd be raised with, and all of it pointed back to his world, his team, his town, his traditions. At first, I brushed it off. He was excited, that's all. but part of me wondered if I was slowly disappearing beneath the weight of us. I didn't regret giving up Boston, not exactly, but I couldn't deny the creeping sense that I'd let go of too much of myself. Still, I clung to the belief that it was all worth it, that when the baby came, it would all make sense again. We'd be a family, united by love and legacy. I just didn't expect that one tiny outfit could unravel everything we'd built. Pregnancy was supposed to bring people closer. That's what everyone said. That friends would gather around, support you, lift you up. But as my belly grew, I started noticing the opposite. Melissa had always been sharp-tongued. It was part of her charm, or at least that's what I used to believe. She didn't go to our college. She was a proud graduate of Westlake, the rival school Nate refused to speak of without rolling his eyes. Our friendship had survived years of playful jabs and sarcastic rivalry, but something about this stage of life had turned her tone from teasing to cutting. She started commenting on everything. My registry, the name options we'd been floating, even the colors I picked for the nursery. "Oh, beige and sage again? Groundbreaking," she'd mutter during a casual lunch. Then she'd plaster on a smile like she was just being funny. One day, while organizing a small get-together to plan for the upcoming baby shower, I invited a few close friends to my place for snacks and brainstorming. I was excited, nervous but excited. It felt like a milestone. Melissa showed up late as usual, then immediately began picking apart everything on the table. "Vegan cupcakes? Rachel, are we feeding adults or rabbits?" She laughed loudly, tossing her purse on the couch. "Also, who decided woodland creatures were a theme now? Is your baby going to be a fox or a raccoon?" The group chuckled awkwardly. I smiled tightly. I just wanted something soft, natural. Not everything has to be a sports arena. Melissa leaned back in her chair. "Good luck convincing Nate of that. He probably wants the baby born in a helmet." It hit a little too close. Nate had indeed suggested a sports-themed corner in the nursery, complete with mini pennants and our college's logo on the wall. When I hesitated, he called me sentimental. "We're not raising him to be neutral," he'd said. "He's a legacy." The word stuck with me. Legacy. I wasn't sure whether it was about tradition or control. Melissa didn't stop there. When I asked if anyone had ideas for low-key games, she smirked. "How about a trivia round on your past sacrifices? First question, what did Rachel give up to become Nate's personal cheerleader?" The room fell silent. "I'm kidding," she said quickly, waving her hand. "God, you're all so serious." I wanted to disappear. The worst part wasn't even the words. It was how normal they felt coming from her. Like this was just what our friendship had become. Her mocking, me absorbing. Later that night, Nate asked how the meeting went. I told him it was fine, just a lot of opinions. He didn't ask for more. He was busy sorting through old college memorabilia, trying to decide which items could make an appearance at the baby shower. "We need to remind people where it all started," he said proudly. And just like that, I felt myself shrinking again, into the role of supportive wife, the keeper of peace, the buffer between Melissa's sarcasm and Nate's intensity. Even casual texts from Melissa started to feel loaded. "Can't wait to see if the baby kicks when I walk in wearing navy," she wrote once. "Maybe it'll recognize a superior legacy." I didn't reply. The truth was, I didn't know who she was anymore. Or maybe I was just now seeing who she'd always been. Someone who needed to be the smartest, the boldest, the one with the last word. And I was too tired to keep absorbing the blows disguised as humor. As the baby shower drew near, I found myself rehearsing responses in the mirror, preparing for her next performance. I knew Melissa would show up with something to say. I just didn't know how much more I could take before snapping. I began to wonder when exactly I'd stopped being Rachel and started being a character in someone else's drama. Nate wanted a legacy, Melissa wanted a stage, and I was the one spinning the plates, trying not to drop anything. There were moments when I stared at myself in the mirror, hand resting on my belly, and asked silently, "What about what I want?" But the truth was, I didn't even know anymore. I had lost the words to speak for myself. It felt like everyone around me had such strong ideas of who I was supposed to be that I forgot how to just exist without explanation. The shower was coming. Melissa would come. Nate would be there for the gifts, and something inside me was already bracing for the storm. It wasn't a question of if, it was a matter of when. The morning of the baby shower, I woke up with a sense of foreboding I couldn't shake. The decorations were set, the cake had arrived, and the sun was shining, but I felt like I was preparing for a performance, not a celebration. I tried to focus on the good, the friends who would come, the family traveling in, the little life growing inside me, but that quiet voice of dread refused to leave. Melissa was the last to arrive. She strutted into the backyard, holding a giant glossy gift bag and wearing a navy blazer over a white blouse. Westlake University's exact colors. Nate, who had joined just for the final portion of the party, stiffened visibly when he saw her. She gave him a bright, pointed smile, then turned to me and said, "Don't worry, Rachel, I brought the perfect gift. Unique, memorable." I forced a smile. "Thanks, Mel. Glad you could make it." We moved through the event in a blur of cupcakes, small talk, and awkward laughter. I tried to keep things light. I didn't want drama. I just wanted to make it to the end of the day without incident. But then came the gift opening. Everyone gathered around as Nate and I sat at the center. I opened onesies, books, and baby blankets. Nate chimed in here and there with quiet jokes. And then I pulled out Melissa's gift. At the top of the bag, a soft blanket. Neutral. Cute. I gave a small relieved sigh. "Thank you, this is really..." But then my hand reached deeper, and I froze. It was a onesie, bright navy blue, with a massive golden hawk printed across the chest. The Westlake University mascot. There was a moment of silence. Nate muttered, "Are you fucking kidding me?" under his breath. The muscles in his jaw twitched. I gave a shaky laugh. "Well, I sure hope this came with a gift receipt," I said, trying to play it off. "Because Oliver's not going to be caught dead in enemy colors." Melissa didn't laugh. "No receipt," she said flatly. "It's not a joke." I stared at her. "Wait, seriously?" "It's a gift," she said coolly. "From one legacy to another." I looked around the room. People were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, a few forced smiles. I set the onesie aside and moved on to the next gift, but the air had changed. The easy chatter was gone. Even the birds seemed to go quiet. When the last ribbon had been untied, the cake cut, and thank yous given, guests began filtering out. Nate disappeared into the kitchen. A minute later, I heard the trash lid slam shut. I walked in to see the onesie crumpled inside the bin. He didn't even look up. "We're not keeping that." I didn't argue. That night, I got a text from a mutual friend. "Hey, Melissa seems pretty upset. What happened?" I replied honestly. "Nate threw away the onesie. We thought it was a joke, but she was serious." Within an hour, Melissa texted me, "Wow, you really are a hypocrite." I stared at the screen. "After everything, you let him throw my gift in the trash? You laughed at me, in front of everyone." I started typing back, tried to explain, to say I didn't mean to embarrass her, that I genuinely thought it was sarcasm. That Nate was adamant that it wasn't about her. It was about the rivalry, about principle. But I deleted every draft. Nothing I said would land right. The next morning, Melissa posted a photo of the onesie on her Instagram story, captioned, "When you try to be thoughtful, but the mom-to-be is too busy playing team mascot to recognize friendship." She didn't tag me, but the comments made it obvious. "So petty, who throws away a baby gift? Yikes, guess some people never grow up." It spread faster than I expected. Mutual friends started messaging, asking what really happened. Someone screenshotted the story and sent it to me with a frown emoji. I wasn't just embarrassed, I was humiliated. I hadn't meant to start a war. I hadn't meant to hurt anyone. I thought I was navigating a moment with grace. But Melissa had taken that moment and weaponized it. She followed up the post with another story, white text on a black background. "Some people wear kindness like a costume, take it off, and all that's left is ego." That one hit hard. For years, Melissa had been my sounding board, my plus one, the friend who showed up with coffee and gossip and just enough edge to make every boring afternoon interesting. And now she had turned me into a villain for an audience of strangers. Nate, unsurprisingly, didn't care. "Let her cry about it," he said. She disrespected our family, our kid. She knew exactly what she was doing. But I wasn't so sure. Had she? Had I misread her? Or had we simply grown into people who couldn't see each other clearly anymore? All I knew was that I felt hollow, like something sacred had been cracked open in public, and now I was too tired to try gluing it back together. That evening, as I lay in bed with Nate snoring beside me, I scrolled through old photos. Me and Melissa at brunch, dancing at my bachelorette party, holding each other's hands through breakups and milestones. I wanted to feel angry, but mostly I felt grieved. A decade of friendship undone by a single outfit. But maybe it wasn't the outfit. Maybe it was the years of unspoken tension, the things we never said out loud, the shift from jokes to jabs, from inside jokes to subtle power plays. The part that hurt the most? No one really knew the truth. They only saw the story Melissa curated, the one where I was the cold, smug mom-to-be who couldn't take a joke. And I didn't have the energy to fight that version. So I closed my phone, turned off the light, and lay in the dark, wondering how something so small could unravel so much. I wondered if Melissa had meant to destroy me, or if we had just outgrown each other in the loudest, messiest way possible. I stopped checking my phone. What started as a trickle of uncomfortable texts turned into silence. The kind that screamed louder than accusations. People I thought would reach out didn't. Those who did sent vague, impersonal messages. "Hope you're okay," or "That party got weird, huh?" But no one asked what really happened. No one wanted the messy truth. They just wanted the drama to end without having to pick sides. Melissa's posts stayed up for 3 days, then disappeared without a word. No apology, no retraction. Just enough time for the comments to build, for the story to solidify. I was difficult. I was cruel. I had humiliated a friend over a baby onesie. The irony was, I hadn't even meant to insult her. I just didn't know how to walk the tightrope anymore, between Nate's expectations and Melissa's provocations. So I'd laughed reflexively and tried to keep things moving. And in doing so, I became the bad guy. They didn't get it. "She crossed a line, Rachel. You don't owe her anything." "That's not the point," I told him. He blinked. "Then, what is?" I didn't have an answer. He went back to sorting his game day memorabilia, whistling the fight song under his breath. The loneliness was worst in the evenings. I'd sit on the nursery rocking chair, surrounded by carefully folded baby clothes, and feel like an intruder in my own life. Like everything around me belonged to a version of me I didn't recognize anymore. I used to be bold. In college, I organized protests, spoke at panels, and led study groups. I'd been offered a graduate scholarship to Boston, for God's sake. People listened when I talked. I had opinions, dreams, and goals. Now, my world was a curated color palette of earth tones, feeding schedules, and school loyalty debates. When had I become so small? One night, I found an old journal while cleaning. The handwriting was younger, loopier, pages filled with ideas for community programs, notes on global health policy, and dreams of working abroad. I cried, not because I regretted choosing Nate, or this baby, or this life, but because I realized how much of myself I'd abandoned along the way. Every compromise had felt small at the time, declining Boston, moving back to his town, adopting his routines, his rhythms. But they'd added up. And now here I was, misunderstood, misjudged, and entirely alone. Even the baby, kicking inside me, felt like someone else's child sometimes, more a symbol of expectation than a person I was ready to meet. Nate noticed my silence but didn't press. He kissed my forehead, rubbed my back, and told me I looked beautiful, but his affection felt rehearsed, like he was loving the version of me that still wore school colors and laughed at rival jokes, not the woman who was breaking, quietly, from the inside out. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror anymore. My face was fuller. Yes, pregnancy would do that. But the light behind my eyes had dulled. I didn't know what I believed, or where I stood, or who I trusted. Every time I opened Instagram, I felt a pang of nausea, not from hormones, but from anxiety. What would I be called today? A narcissist? A fake friend? A control freak? I started deleting apps, then texts, then entire conversations. I shut down the baby shower group chat. Melissa never said another word, and no one protested. In the vacuum, my thoughts grew louder. What if this was just the beginning? What if motherhood meant losing myself completely? What if being someone's wife, someone's mom, meant I'd never get to be Rachel again? I didn't know the answers, but I knew the silence was crushing me, and something inside had to scream before it went numb forever. One night, I walked out onto the porch and sat there barefoot in the dark. The wind was warm, summer heavy, brushing over my skin like a memory. I closed my eyes and let myself imagine a different life, a parallel version of me, still in Boston, still chasing dreams that were mine alone. Not better, not worse, just hers. I missed her. I missed the way she filled rooms with ideas, the way she held eye contact without flinching, the way she trusted her own voice. Somewhere between love and loyalty, between baby clothes and alumni pride, I had misplaced that girl. And now, with the world calling me dramatic, selfish, and fake, I wasn't sure how to get her back. But I knew this: if I didn't start trying, I might lose her forever. And I wasn't ready to let her go. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to change. It was slower than that. Quieter. Like peeling away layers of noise, until I could finally hear my own voice again. It started with a notebook. A plain, spiral-bound thing, left forgotten on the back of a bookshelf. I picked it up one afternoon, sat on the edge of the bed, and wrote 4 words at the top of the page. What do I want? The answer didn't come easily, but I kept writing. 3 pages a day, sometimes 5. Anger, sadness, frustration, memories, regrets, little flickers of hope. I didn't filter it. I didn't write for anyone else. For the first time in months, maybe years, I was speaking only to myself. I started cleaning, really cleaning, not just the nursery or the kitchen, but the hidden corners, the drawer of mismatched socks, the pile of someday clothes I hadn't worn in years. The mental clutter. I went room by room with a trash bag and a sense of ceremony. It wasn't about tidying, it was about claiming space. This was my home too, my life. I was allowed to shape it. I spent less time online. I walked. I cooked slowly. I played music that wasn't from a college playlist. And one evening, without really planning to, I messaged Melissa. Can we talk? I didn't expect a yes. I certainly didn't expect her to respond within a minute. We met at a small park halfway between our houses. It was late afternoon, the kind of hazy sunlight that makes everything look a little softer. Melissa was already on the bench when I arrived, sunglasses on, arms crossed. I sat down slowly. Thanks for coming. She shrugged. I was curious. There was a pause, awkward, stretched, brittle. I'm not here to apologize, I said, carefully. I mean, I'm sorry things ended up the way they did, but I didn't call you to beg or fix something fake. She raised an eyebrow. Then why? Because I needed to say things out loud, to clear the air, for me. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were tired. Maybe mine were too. I genuinely thought the onesie was a joke, I said. That you were doing your usual thing, being snarky. I didn't realize how serious it was. And I should have asked. I should have paused instead of performing. Melissa looked down at her lap. I was trying to be thoughtful. I knew Nate would hate it, but I thought you'd laugh. You used to laugh. I know. I changed. Maybe we both did. We sat in silence for a while, watching a group of kids chase each other across the grass. I was angry, she said eventually, but mostly I was hurt. Not because of the gift. Because you didn't see me. Not really. I didn't see myself either, I admitted. Not until recently. She nodded. So what now? I don't know, I said, but I wanted this moment. No audience, no story, just us. Melissa nodded again, slower this time. Okay. We didn't hug. We didn't promise to rebuild. But when we parted ways, something unknotted in my chest. That night I went home and wrote about it, every word, every pause, every breath. And I realized something. I didn't need to fix everything. I just needed to start feeling again. To stop surviving on autopilot. To choose, daily, to live from the inside out. Nate noticed the change too. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't quiet either. When he made another college joke about our son's team loyalty, I smiled and said, he'll get to choose. He blinked. You serious? Absolutely. He didn't argue. Maybe he was starting to hear me too. I didn't have all the answers, but I was asking better questions. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. I kept journaling every morning, sometimes just a sentence, sometimes pages. I wrote about what scared me, what I was proud of, and what I wanted my child to know one day. Not just about love, but about boundaries, about listening, about being brave enough to grow. I started setting small intentions. Drink water, take a walk, say no without guilt, allow silence. Let joy be simple. The nursery looked the same, but it felt different now. Less like a monument to expectation, and more like a space for discovery. A place where I'd meet someone new. Not just my son, but maybe myself too. Healing didn't mean pretending everything was okay. It meant standing in the truth, even when it trembled. And that was enough. For now. I didn't need revenge. I needed to reclaim the narrative. And it started with one bold decision. The day of Oliver's welcome gathering arrived with a gentle breeze and a sky the color of hope. It wasn't a traditional baby christening or a naming ceremony, just a small event in our backyard, a way to introduce him to the people who had waited with us, who had watched me grow, and stumble and come back to myself. I kept it simple, no banners, no mascots, no trace of maroon or navy, just pale linens, soft music, and fresh flowers picked from the field behind our house. Nate stood beside me holding Oliver, who had just woken from a nap. He looked peaceful, blinking slowly at the blur of people and petals. I reached over, adjusted his tiny shirt. And that's when the murmurs began. Embroidered across the front of his soft white onesie, in delicate hand-stitched letters, were 3 words. Freedom, choice, grace. I'd sewn it myself. It had taken me weeks, working at night, after journaling, when the house was still, and my thoughts were finally quiet. Each word meant something to something I wanted him to carry, long after the college fights and friendship dramas faded into memory. Freedom, to live beyond the roles others cast for him. Choice, to follow his heart, not a tradition. Grace, to forgive, to begin again, to grow. I took Oliver from Nate, kissed his head, and stepped forward. Thank you all for coming, I began. This isn't a ceremony, it's not a performance, it's just a moment. A small pause in this wild life to honor the beginning of someone new. There were a few chuckles, a few nods. I know the last few months have been messy, I continued. I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. I've been hurt. And through all of it, I kept trying to be who I thought I was supposed to be. A good wife, a gracious friend, a peacekeeper. I looked down at Oliver, his hand curled around my pinky. But this little guy doesn't need me to be perfect, he needs me to be real, and he needs a world where he can be real too. I turned slightly, letting the sunlight catch the stitching on his shirt. Some guests leaned forward, reading. Freedom, choice, grace, I said. These are not school colors, they're not family legacies. They're values, and they're what I hope to give him. Starting today. There was a pause. I could feel Nate beside me, still and quiet. I could sense the guests scanning each other's faces, unsure whether to clap, to smile, to stay silent. And then someone, an old professor of mine, stood up. That's the most honest speech I've heard in years, she said. And that shirt? That's a manifesto. A small wave of laughter followed, then applause. Melissa was there. She had come quietly, without fanfare. I hadn't invited her directly, but I had sent the group message. I didn't know if she'd show. But she did. She approached me afterward, just the two of us near the lemonade table. I like the shirt, she said. Thanks, I replied. I didn't do it for show. I know, she said. Then, after a pause, I think he'll grow up to be proud of you. I blinked. You think so? She nodded. I'm starting to. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it didn't have to be. Sometimes, dignity is quieter than revenge. Nate didn't say much that day, but that night as we lay in bed, he turned to me. I didn't expect that, he said. Well, today, you just stood there and told the truth. I had to, I whispered. For him, for me. He didn't argue, just nodded, eyes glassy. The next day, a photo from the event made it online. Not one I posted, someone else did. It was candid, me holding Oliver, his onesie catching the light. The caption said, only. May we all be raised with freedom, choice, and grace. It got shared more than I expected, commented on, passed around. But more importantly, it reminded me that the loudest statement isn't always a shout. Sometimes, it's a stitch. Sometimes, it's a mother standing her ground, not against others, but for her child. And for the woman she chose to become. In the days that followed, messages trickled in. People I hadn't heard from in weeks, months. That was brave, one said. You made me cry, said another. A mom I barely knew sent a picture of her daughter in a homemade shirt with the same 3 words. The momentum grew quietly. Not viral, but steady. Friends who had once pulled away began showing up again. Not with explanations, but with presence. They brought meals. They asked about Oliver. And this time, they listened without judgment. Even Nate changed, in subtle ways. He stopped with the school chants, stopped referring to our son as the future quarterback. He started saying things like, whatever he becomes, I hope he's kind. I didn't press. I didn't gloat. I just smiled. And me, I kept stitching. One word at a time. Into clothes, into journals, in days. Freedom, choice, grace. Not just for my son, but for myself. Because for the first time in a long time, I was no longer performing for approval. I was living with intention. And that changed everything. A few weeks later, Melissa texted me again. You want to grab coffee sometime? It was brief. No emojis, no qualifiers, and unlike her. For a moment I stared at the screen. I thought about the years of inside jokes, the countless late-night phone calls, the way we used to read each other's minds. But then I thought about the silence after the scandal, the stories she'd spread, the times she could have called and didn't. I typed, I appreciate the message, but I think we're in different places now. I hit send and felt free. Melissa didn't reply, and that was that. Some losses don't need mourning, just an acknowledgement. Nate, meanwhile, was adjusting, slowly. He started asking questions he used to dismiss. He began listening, really listening, when I talked about returning to work, about wanting to feel whole again. There were slip-ups, comments about just staying home with the baby, assumptions he'd previously taken for granted. But each time, I pushed back. Not with anger, with clarity. This isn't about proving something, I told him one night. It's about returning to who I am, who I was before all this rivalry, all this performance. He looked at me, quieter than usual. I don't want to lose you, he said. Then don't make me disappear, I said gently. I applied for a part-time research position at a nearby women's health clinic. It wasn't Boston, but it was a start. The first time I stepped into the office, baby spit up on my shoulder and resume in my hand. I felt something click. The world hadn't ended. It had just shifted. And now I was learning to move with it, not against it. Friends came and went, some returned, others faded. I stopped chasing the ones who ghosted when things got hard. Instead, I built new connections. People who valued depth over gossip, authenticity over tradition. Some days were hard, some nights I still cried. But the difference now was this. I cried as myself, not as a version of me someone else had designed. I was a mother. As a woman. I was a voice that no longer whispered to stay safe. And Melissa? She became a story I told sometimes. About a friend I once loved, and the lesson she left behind. Not everyone grows with you. And that's okay. Because I was growing anyway. On my first full day back at work, I wore a blouse I hadn't touched in over a year. It still fit, surprisingly, but more than that, it felt like armor. I packed my lunch, kissed Oliver on the forehead, and walked out the door with my head high. The clinic welcomed me with warmth. My new supervisor, a woman in her 50s named Alia, gave me a tour and said, "You don't look nervous. That's rare." "I'm not nervous," I replied, realizing it was true. "I'm ready." Nate took Oliver for the day. When I got home, he'd made dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and store-bought sauce. But he greeted me at the door like I'd come home from war. "How was it?" "Good," I said. "Really good." He smiled. "You look different." "Like me?" "Yeah," he nodded. "Exactly like you." We didn't need to say more. Later that week, Melissa sent one more message, a long one this time. She talked about reflection, about pain, about how much she missed us. But I read it with the calm detachment of someone who had moved on. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I no longer needed her validation. Melissa had made her choice, I'd made mine. Now, I was building something new. Something mine. Something honest. Sometimes, I still think about the onesie. Not the one Melissa gave me, the one that sparked so much fallout, but the one I stitched myself. The one that cradled my son's chest with 3 words I didn't fully understand until I lived them. Freedom, choice, grace. It's packed away now, folded carefully in a small cedar box beneath Oliver's crib. He's outgrown it, of course. Babies do that. Grow, change, stretch beyond what once fit them. So do mothers. I look back at everything, the party, the posts, the silence, the tears, and I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude, not because it was easy, but because it forced me to shed skin I hadn't realized I'd outgrown. There's a strange power in public embarrassment. It exposes what matters, what's worth defending, what isn't. I thought for a while that the biggest betrayal was Melissa's post, but it wasn't. The real betrayal was how easily I had let other people narrate my story, how quickly I'd surrendered authorship of my own life, handed it off to Nate, to my friends, to the culture of loyalty and pride that once felt like love. Becoming a mother didn't just teach me how to hold a child. It taught me how to hold myself. Firmly. Gently. With room to breathe. Oliver is still too young to understand legacy or shame or college rivalries. To him, love is a warm bottle and the sound of my voice. He doesn't care what team his dad roots for, or what mistakes I made last spring. He just knows when I'm truly there. And now, I am. Not distracted, not performing, not pleasing. Just present. That is the greatest gift I've given him. Not the carefully chosen onesies, or the Pinterest-worthy nursery, but a mom who is no longer afraid to be herself. One day, he'll make his own choices. He'll wear shirts I don't like, say things that challenge me, maybe even fall in love with a college I once couldn't stand. And I'll cheer for him, not because I agree, but because he'll be choosing for himself. That's what I want most. Not a child who follows, but a child who listens inward and trusts what he hears. And maybe, just maybe, he'll remember the story of the onesie, how one small outfit nearly broke his mother, and how stitching another helped her find her way back, not to who she was, but to who she was meant to become. Sometimes I imagine future conversations, when Oliver asks me why I didn't push him to follow tradition, why I let him make his own way. I'll tell him it's because someone once told me who to be, and I followed until I didn't recognize myself. And then I'll say, I didn't want that for you. I'll show him the journal I kept during those months, pages filled with messy thoughts and quiet revelations. Maybe he won't read it all, but maybe he'll see what growth looks like, not polished, not perfect, just real. There's no single moment where the transformation happens, no music swells, no applause, just a quiet choice repeated over and over, until one day you look in the mirror and see someone who belongs to herself again. I belong to myself now. That doesn't mean I'm not Nate's partner or Oliver's mother. It means I don't disappear into those roles. I live inside them, fully. That's the lesson. You don't have to reject everything to reclaim something. You just have to remember what was always yours. And protect it. Like a name whispered in the dark. Like a stitch on a shirt. Like a promise to a child you're still learning to raise. And a woman you're still learning to be.